Jake Morrison floated in the cold darkness of space, his suit lights cutting through the black void as he approached the dead ship. The vessel was huge, maybe 3 times the size of anything humans had ever built. Its metal hull was twisted and scarred from some ancient battle, but Jake could see the value hidden beneath the damage. This kind of alien technology could feed his family for years. He pulled himself through a torn opening in the ship's side, his magnetic boots clicking against the metal floor as gravity generators kicked in. The air was thin, but breathable. Jake pulled off his helmet and clipped it to his belt, breathing in the stale atmosphere. His scanner beeped softly, showing energy readings deeper in the ship. "Come on, baby," Jake whispered to himself. "Show me what you're hiding." The corridor stretched ahead of him, lined with strange symbols that glowed faintly blue. Jake had seen enough alien ships to know this was Veltar design. The crystalline race built everything to last, which meant good salvage. He followed his scanner toward the engine room, stepping carefully over debris and broken cables. The engine core was massive, a perfect sphere of dark metal suspended in the center of the room. Jake whistled low. This was the real prize. Veltar engines were worth more than most people made in a lifetime. He pulled out his cutting tools and got to work, carefully removing access panels to get at the valuable components inside. He had been working for maybe an hour when he heard the sound. A low hum that made his bones vibrate. Jake froze, his hand still on his cutting torch. That was not the sound of a dead ship. The lights came on all at once, bright and harsh. Jake spun around and found himself staring at 6 tall figures in the doorway. Veltar warriors, their crystalline skin reflecting the light like living diamonds. Each one had 4 arms and stood over 7 feet tall. Their weapons were already pointed at him. "Human scavenger," one of them said in accented English. "You will come with us." Jake slowly set down his tools and raised his hands. "Look, I didn't know this ship was claimed. I can leave right now. No harm done." The lead warrior stepped forward, and Jake could see this one was female from the more delicate features and the way she held herself. She wore the dark blue uniform of a ship captain, with silver markings that showed her rank. "You will come with us," she repeated, her voice cold as space. "Now." 2 of the warriors moved to flank Jake while the others kept their weapons trained on him. Jake did not fight. He had seen what Veltar weapons could do, and his suit would not protect him. They escorted him through the corridors of what he now realized was not a derelict at all, but a functioning ship that had been powered down. The bridge was beautiful in the way all Veltar technology was beautiful. Smooth curves and flowing lines, control panels that looked more like art than machinery. The captain took her place in the center chair while her crew formed a circle around Jake. "I am Captain Zarath of the vessel Void Dancer," she said, looking down at him like he was something unpleasant she had found on her boot. "You were caught stealing from a ship under our protection." "I didn't know," Jake said again. There were no markers, no signals. The ship looked dead. "Because we wanted it to look dead," Zarath replied. "It was a trap, and you walked right into it. Humans always do, too greedy to be careful." Jake felt his face flush with anger, but he kept his voice steady. "If you were trying to catch someone, you caught the wrong person. I'm just a salvager trying to make a living." One of the crew members laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "A pet that talks back. How amusing." Zarath studied Jake with her large, dark eyes. "What do you know about Veltar engineering, human?" "Enough to know that ship has a phase shift drive," Jake said, nodding toward the viewport where the derelict floated. Probably a Mark 7, based on the energy signature. Built maybe 200 years ago, before your people upgraded to quantum cores. The bridge went quiet. Zarath leaned forward in her chair. How do you know this? Because I've worked on ships like it before, Jake said. Humans might not build the fanciest technology, but we know how to fix things. We have to, because nobody else will do it for us. Zarath exchanged glances with her first officer, a scarred male with crystal growths along his jaw. They spoke in rapid Veltar, too fast for Jake to follow. He caught a few words, useful and keep and primitive. You will work for us, Zarath finally said, turning back to Jake. You will help us salvage ships and technology. In return, you will not be spaced. And if I refuse, then you will be spaced. Jake looked around at the circle of armed warriors. Not much of a choice. What exactly would I be doing? What humans do best, Zarath said with a cold smile. You will crawl into small spaces and fix broken things. You will be our pet engineer. The crew laughed again, but Jake noticed that Zarath was still watching him carefully. There was something in her expression, a calculation that made him think this was about more than just having a human servant. All right, Jake said, but I want a share of whatever we salvage. I'm not working for free. You will work for your life, Zarath replied. That should be payment enough. The first officer stepped forward and grabbed Jake's arm with two of his hands. His grip was strong enough to crack bones. I will show the pet to its quarters. As Jake was led away, he caught Zarath watching him again. For just a moment, her expression seemed almost curious instead of contemptuous. Then the bridge doors closed behind him, and he was alone with his captors. The quarters they gave him were small and sparse, little more than a storage closet with a sleeping mat. But there was a small viewport, and Jake stood looking out at the stars as the Void Dancer powered up its engines. The derelict ship fell behind them, growing smaller until it was just another point of light in the darkness. Jake had been in worse situations. At least he was alive, and alive meant there was still a chance to prove himself. Humans had always been underestimated by the other races, but that could be an advantage if he was smart about it. The ship jumped to faster-than-light speed, and the stars became streaks of light outside his window. Jake settled down on his sleeping mat and began to plan. He would show them what humans were really capable of. He would earn their respect, one repair job at a time, and maybe, if he was very careful and very lucky, he would find a way to turn this situation to his advantage. After all, humans had not survived this long in a hostile galaxy by giving up when things looked impossible. They had survived by being too stubborn to know when they were beaten. 3 weeks had passed since Jake became a prisoner aboard the Void Dancer, and he was already proving to be more useful than anyone had expected. The Veltar crew had started calling him simply human instead of pet, which Jake considered a small victory. He was currently wedged inside a maintenance shaft, working on the ship's water recycling system. The space was too narrow for any of the tall Veltar crew members, but Jake fit perfectly. His small human size, which the aliens saw as a weakness, was actually an advantage in situations like this. "Hand me the plasma cutter," Jake called out. To Korth, the engineering officer who had been assigned to watch him. The scarred Veltar passed the tool through the opening, his 4 arms making the task easy. "The connections in here are completely fried," Jake said as he worked. "When was the last time anyone maintained this system?" 6 months ago, Korth replied. "Our previous engineer said it would last another year." "Your previous engineer was wrong," Jake said, carefully cutting away the damaged wiring. "These biofilters need to be cleaned every month, not every 6. No wonder your water tastes like metal." Jake had discovered early on that the Veltar were excellent at building technology, but terrible at maintaining it. They treated their ships like works of art, too beautiful to get dirty with regular maintenance. Jake, on the other hand, had grown up fixing broken equipment with whatever spare parts he could find. "There," Jake said, pulling himself out of the shaft. His clothes were dirty and his hands were stained with lubricant, but the job was done. "That should give you clean water for the first time in months." Korth tested the nearest water dispenser and his eyes widened in surprise. The water ran clear and pure, with no trace of the metallic taste they had all grown used to. "How did you do this so quickly?" "Humans are good at fixing things," Jake said, wiping his hands on a rag. "We have to be. We don't have the luxury of building new equipment every time something breaks." Korth studied Jake with new interest. Over the past weeks, the engineering officer had watched the human solve problem after problem that had been troubling his department for months. Jake had an intuitive understanding of how systems work together, even alien systems he had never seen before. "Captain Zarath wants to see you," Korth said. "Inner quarters." Jake nodded and followed the tall alien through the ship's corridors. The crew members they passed no longer stared at him with open hostility. Instead, they watched him with something closer to curiosity. Word was spreading about the human's abilities. Captain Zarath's quarters were larger than Jake's closet-sized room, but still cramped by human standards. The Veltar preferred high ceilings and open spaces, so the furniture was all tall and narrow. Zarath sat behind a desk made of what looked like polished crystal, reviewing reports on a holographic display. "You fixed the water system?" she said without looking up. "Yes, Captain. In 2 hours. Our engineers said it would take days." "Your engineers were overthinking the problem," Jake said. "Sometimes the simple solution is the best solution." Zarath finally looked at him, her dark eyes unreadable. "Is that a human saying?" "It's an engineer's saying. Good engineering works the same way no matter what species builds it." "Sit!" Zarath commanded, gesturing to a chair that was far too tall for Jake. He climbed onto it, his feet dangling above the floor like a child. "My crew is starting to respect you," Zarath said. "That was not expected." "Maybe you underestimated humans," Jake replied. "Perhaps." Zarath leaned back in her chair. "Tell me about your species' approach to technology." Jake thought for a moment. "We build things to last, but we also build them to be repaired. Every human knows how to fix basic equipment because we have to. If something breaks on a human ship, we can't just wait for a specialist to arrive. We make do with what we have." "Make do," Zarath repeated. "An interesting concept." "Your people build beautiful ships," Jake said. "Perfect ships. But perfection is fragile. When something goes wrong, you have to replace the entire system because nothing was designed to be repaired." "And humans?" "Humans build ugly ships that fall apart every few months. But we can fix them with spare parts and creativity. Our ships might not be pretty, but they keep flying." Zarath was quiet for a long moment, studying Jake with those large, dark eyes. "You speak of your species with pride." "Why shouldn't I? We might not be the strongest or the smartest, but we survive, we adapt, we solve problems that other species can't solve because they're too proud to try our methods." "Too proud," Zarath said softly. "Yes, pride can be a weakness." The ship's communication system chimed, and the first officer's voice filled the room. "Captain, we're approaching the Koreth system. The navigation computer is showing errors. Zarath stood immediately. I must go to the bridge. This conversation will continue later. Jake followed her to the bridge, where the crew was gathered around the navigation console. The holographic display showed their current position, but the course projections kept flickering and changing. The stellar drift calculations are corrupted, the navigator reported. We'll need to drop out of faster-than-light travel and recalibrate manually. It will take 8 hours. We don't have 8 hours, Zarath said sharply. We have a salvage contract that expires in 4 hours. If we're late, the rights go to another crew. Jake stepped closer to the display, studying the swirling patterns of data. He had worked with human navigation systems before, and while this Veltar technology was more advanced, the basic principles were the same. Captain, Jake said quietly, may I look at this? The bridge crew turned to stare at him. The navigator, a thin female named Thys, looked offended that a human would dare to offer help with her equipment. Zarath hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Show me. Jake studied the display, following the data streams with his finger. Your computer is trying to calculate too many variables at once. It's getting confused by the quantum fluctuations in the stellar drift. But you don't need perfect calculations, just good enough ones. Good enough? Thys asked in disgust. Navigation must be precise. Not for every jump, Jake said. Look, you can approximate the drift by using the average of the last 5 measurements, instead of trying to calculate real-time changes. It won't be perfect, but it'll get you close enough to make manual corrections. He reached toward the console, then stopped and looked at Zarath. Permission to modify your navigation system, Captain? Zarath looked around at her crew. Jake could see the conflict in their faces, pride warring with necessity. They needed to make that appointment, but accepting help from a human was difficult. For them, do it, Zarath said finally. Jake's fingers flew over the alien controls, making rapid adjustments to the calculation algorithms. The display flickered, then stabilized. The course projection appeared, clean and clear. There, Jake said, stepping back. Try it now. This ran the calculations, her expression skeptical. The results came back in seconds instead of minutes, and the course was stable. This actually works. It's not perfect, Jake warned. You'll need to make small corrections every few hours, but it'll get you where you need to go on time. Zarath looked at the display, then at Jake. For the first time since he had been captured, her expression held something other than contempt or cold calculation. Execute the jump, she ordered. The ship leaped back into faster-than-light travel, following Jake's improvised navigation solution. The crew worked quietly at their stations, but Jake could feel their eyes on him when they thought he wasn't looking. That was clever, Zarath said as they left the bridge. And practical. Human engineering, Jake replied with a small smile. Sometimes good enough really is good enough. As they walked back toward his quarters, Jake noticed something different in the way the crew looked at him. The open hostility was gone, replaced by something that might have been the beginning of respect. It was a small change, but it was a start. He was no longer just a pet they kept around for entertainment. He was becoming useful, and usefulness was the first step toward acceptance. The space station Nexus Point was a massive structure that hung in the void like a metal city. Dozens of ships from different species docked at its many ports, trading goods and information from across the galaxy. Jake had never seen anything like it. and he pressed his face to the viewport as the Void Dancer approached one of the smaller docking bays. "Try not to embarrass us, human," Korth said as they prepared to disembark. "Station security does not look kindly on primitive species causing trouble." Jake just nodded. Over the past 6 weeks, he had learned when to argue and when to stay quiet. This was definitely a time to stay quiet. He followed Captain Zarath and 3 of her crew members through the airlock and onto the station proper. The corridors were wide and tall, designed to accommodate the many different alien species that used the station. Jake felt very small walking among the towering Veltar, massive Kron traders, and sleek Therian diplomats. Most of them ignored him completely, but a few stared with curiosity at the rare sight of a human so far from Earth space. They were heading to meet another salvage crew to discuss territorial rights in a recently discovered debris field. It was supposed to be a simple negotiation, but Jake could tell from the tension in Zarath's shoulders that she expected trouble. The meeting was held in a neutral conference room with a large oval table. Captain Zarath took her place at one end, her crew flanking her in perfect formation. Jake stood slightly behind and to her left, trying to be as invisible as possible. The other crew arrived a few minutes later. They were Veltar as well, but from a different clan based on the subtle differences in their uniform designs. Their captain was a tall male with elaborate crystal growths along his arms and a permanent sneer on his face. "Captain Vectar," Zarath said formally. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting." "Zarath," Vectar replied, his tone dismissive. "I see you brought your entire crew for such a simple discussion. Are you expecting trouble?" "I am expecting a civilized negotiation between equals," Zarath said smoothly. "The debris field in question is unclaimed territory. We propose dividing it into sectors based on salvage capability." Vectar laughed, the sound harsh in the enclosed space. "Salvage capability? You mean the ability to crawl through wreckage, looking for scraps? Perhaps we should ask the rats in the station's walls to help us negotiate." Jake felt his face flush with anger, but he kept his expression neutral. He had heard worse insults directed at humans, and losing his temper would only make things worse for everyone. The negotiation continued for over an hour, with both captains trading subtle threats disguised as polite conversation. Jake could see that Zarath was holding her own, but Vectar had more ships and crew members. The math was not in their favor. "I think we're forgetting something important," Vectar said suddenly, his eyes fixing on Jake. "What exactly is that? Creature doing here? This is a meeting between ship captains, not a place for pets." The room went completely quiet. Jake could feel every eye on him waiting to see how he would react. This was the moment he had been dreading since they arrived at the station. Zarath's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice level. "All crew, members have a right to observe negotiations that affect their ship. Crew member?" Vectar leaned back in his chair, openly amused. "Zarath, surely you don't consider that thing an actual member of your crew. It's a pet at best, a tool at worst." Jake saw something flicker across Zarath's face, embarrassment, anger, or maybe something else entirely. When she spoke, her words cut through him like a blade. "You're right, of course," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "He's my pet human, useful for small spaces and simple repairs, nothing more." The words hit Jake harder than he expected. Over the past weeks, he had begun to think that maybe he was earning some measure of respect from the crew. He had started to believe that Zarath saw him as more than just a useful tool. Apparently, he had been wrong. Vectar's crew laughed, enjoying the sight of a human being put in his place. A pet that thinks it belongs at the negotiating table. How amusing! What's next, Zarath? Will you start asking its opinion on tactical decisions? Jake felt something break inside him. Not his spirit. He had been through worse than this. But something else, some hope he had been carrying without realizing it. He looked at Zarath, who was staring straight ahead, refusing to meet his eyes. "Only yours, Captain," Jake said quietly. The words came out before he could stop them. They were not angry or defiant. They were simply honest. If he was going to be called a pet, then he would choose whose pet he was. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Zarath's head snapped toward him, her dark eyes wide with surprise. A flush of deep blue spread across her crystalline features, the Veltar equivalent of a blush. She stared at Jake for a long moment, and he saw something in her expression that he had never seen before. Not embarrassment, but something deeper and more complex. Vectar noticed the exchange immediately. Well, it seems your pet is more attached to you than expected, Zarath." "How interesting." The mocking tone in his voice made it clear what he was thinking. The idea of any kind of personal relationship between a Veltar captain and a human was beyond scandalous. It was unthinkable. Zarath's blush deepened, spreading down her neck and arms. "We should focus on the matter at hand," Zarath said, her voice slightly strained. "The debris field negotiations." But the damage was already done. Vectar had seen her reaction, and his crew was whispering among themselves. Jake realized with growing horror that his simple words had created a diplomatic incident. He had meant to assert his loyalty, but instead he had embarrassed his captain in front of her rivals. The rest of the negotiation was a disaster. Vectar pressed his advantage ruthlessly, using Zarath's obvious discomfort to extract concessions. She would never have agreed to under normal circumstances. By the end of the meeting, her crew had lost exclusive rights to nearly half of the debris field. As they walked back to their ship, Jake could feel the hostile stares from Zarath's crew. Korth looked ready to throw him out an airlock, while Thys muttered angrily in rapid Veltar. Jake didn't need a translation to know she was discussing creative ways to dispose of a problematic human. Zarath walked ahead of the group, her back straight and her pace quick. She didn't look at Jake once during the entire trip back to the Void Dancer. Once they were aboard, she finally turned to face him. Her expression was unreadable, but Jake could see the tension in her shoulders and the way her 4 arms were held rigidly at her sides. "In my quarters," she said simply. "Now." Jake followed, her through the ship, aware of the crew members watching their every step. Whatever was about to happen, it would determine his future aboard the Void Dancer. He had crossed a line back at the station, and now he would face the consequences. The door to Zarath's quarters closed behind them with a soft hiss, leaving them alone for the first time since the disastrous negotiation. Jake stood at attention, waiting for her to speak first. "What did you mean?" Zarath asked finally, her voice very quiet. Jake met her eyes. "Exactly what I said, Captain. If I have to be someone's pet, then I choose to be yours." Zarath stared at him for a long moment, that deep blue flush still visible on her crystalline skin. When she spoke again, her voice was even quieter than before. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Jake nodded slowly. "I've made things complicated." "Complicated," Zarath repeated, sinking into her chair. "Yes, Jake Morrison. You have definitely made things complicated." It was the first time she had used his actual name since the day he was captured, Somehow that felt more significant than anything else that had happened at the station. For 3 days after the station incident, Jake and Captain Zarath barely spoke to each other. She gave him orders through Korth, and he completed his assignments without question. The rest of the crew watched this careful dance with barely concealed tension, wondering when the situation would finally explode. Jake was in the engine room, replacing worn components in the power distribution network, when the ship's alarm started blaring. The lights switched to emergency red, and he could hear the crew running through the corridors above him. "All hands to stations," came Zarath's voice over the communication system. "We have a priority salvage mission. Prep for immediate departure." Jake secured his tools and made his way to the bridge, where he found the crew gathered around the main display. The hologram showed a massive space station, easily 10 times the size of Nexus Point. But this station was dying. Explosions bloomed along its hull as internal systems failed, and sections of the structure were already breaking away and tumbling into space. "The Koreth Research Station," Zarath explained as Jake joined the group. "They were experimenting with new power generation techniques. Something went wrong, and now they have maybe 6 hours before the entire station tears itself apart." "Are we evacuating the survivors?" Jake asked. "The evacuation ships are already handling that," Thys replied without looking at him. "We're here for the research data. The Koreth government is offering a fortune for the recovery of their experimental files." Zarath highlighted a section of the station on the display. "The data core is located here in the Central Research Lab. The problem is that the entire section has been sealed off by emergency bulkheads. The only way in is through the maintenance shafts, and those passages are too small for any Veltar to navigate." Jake understood immediately. You need someone small enough to crawl through the maintenance system. "The radiation levels are increasing every minute," Zarath continued, her eyes finally meeting his for the first time in days. "It's dangerous, very dangerous. But if we don't retrieve that data in the next 4 hours, it will be lost forever when the station explodes." The bridge was quiet except for the soft hum of the ship's engines. Jake could feel everyone watching. Him, waiting for his response. This was clearly a job for the human, but Zarath was asking instead of ordering. "I'll do it," Jake said simply. 2 hours later, Jake floated in the vacuum between the Void Dancer and the dying station, wearing a heavy radiation suit that made every movement clumsy and slow. The station loomed ahead of him like a metal mountain, its surface scarred by explosions and venting atmosphere. "Radiation levels are increasing," came Thys's voice in his helmet communicator. "You have maybe 2 hours before your suit protection fails." "Understood," Jake replied, activating his magnetic boots as he touched down on the station's hull. "Beginning entry now." He had studied the station schematics during the flight over, memorizing the route through the maintenance shafts to the data core. The entry point was a damaged airlock that led directly into the maintenance level. Jake squeezed through the twisted metal and found himself in a narrow corridor filled with pipes and cables. The Geiger counter on his suit was clicking steadily, but the levels were still within acceptable limits. Jake pulled himself through the cramped space, following his mental map toward the center of the station. "Jake." Zarath's voice came through the communicator, startling him. She had been silent since he left the ship. "Yes, Captain?" "The structural engineers say the station has less time than we thought. Maybe 90 minutes before total collapse. If you can't find the data core quickly, you'll have to leave without me," Jake finished. "I understand." There was a pause. "That is not what I was going to say." Jake stopped crawling and pressed. his back against the tunnel wall. "What were you going to say?" Another pause, longer this time. "I was going to say, be careful." Something warm spread through Jake's chest, and it had nothing to do with the radiation. "I will, Captain." He continued through the maintenance tunnels, squeezing through spaces that would have been impossible for any member of Zarath's crew. The human body might be weak and fragile compared to other species, but it was also compact and flexible. Sometimes being small was an advantage. The data core chamber was exactly where the schematics had indicated, a room full of crystalline storage devices that hummed with barely contained energy. Jake plugged his portable scanner into the main terminal and began the download process. The files were massive, containing years of research data, and the transfer was painfully slow. "Data transfer at 30%, he reported. "Jake," came Korth's voice. "We're reading massive power fluctuations throughout that section. The containment systems are failing." Jake looked at his suit's radiation meter and felt his stomach drop. The levels were climbing rapidly, approaching the danger zone. At this rate, he would be in serious trouble long before the data transfer completed. "Transfer at 50%, he said, trying to keep his voice calm. The station shuddered around him, and Jake grabbed onto the nearest support beam as gravity fluctuated wildly. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear the groaning of metal. Under incredible stress, the station was tearing itself apart. 70%, Jake. Zarath's voice again, tight with worry. "Your radiation exposure is approaching critical levels. You need to abort." 80%. "That's an order, Jake. Abort the mission and return to the ship immediately." Jake looked at the progress bar on his scanner. So close. The Korath government was offering enough money to set up the entire crew for life. This was the kind of opportunity that came once in a lifetime. 90%. The lights in the data core chamber flickered and went out, leaving Jake in darkness except for the glow from his suit's displays. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, but he could tell it wouldn't last long. 95%. "Jake!" Zarath's voice was sharp with panic now. "The entire section is about to collapse. Get out of there now!" "Transfer complete," Jake said, disconnecting his scanner and stuffing it into his suit's storage compartment. "Data secured. Beginning return journey." But as he turned toward the tunnel entrance, Jake heard a sound that made his blood freeze. The deep rumble of structural collapse, growing louder by the second. The maintenance tunnel he had used to enter the chamber was buckling, its walls cracking under the stress. "The exit route is blocked," Jake reported, trying to keep the fear out of his voice. "I need an alternate path." "Checking schematics," This replied immediately. "There's another maintenance shaft 2 levels down, but the radiation levels in that area are lethal," Zarath finished. "Jake, there has to be another way." Jake studied his suit's display, watching the radiation counter climb higher and higher. His protection was failing, and he could already feel the first symptoms of exposure, nausea and dizziness that made it hard to concentrate. "There is another way," he said finally. "There's an emergency escape pod in this section. If I can reach it..." "The pods were all evacuated hours ago," Korth said. "Not all of them." Jake was already moving, pulling himself through the damaged corridors toward the pod bay. The schematics show one pod that was offline for maintenance. If it still has power... The escape pod was exactly where Jake expected to find it, a small craft designed for emergency evacuation. But as he reached for the control panel, his legs gave out beneath him. The radiation sickness was getting worse, and he could taste blood in his mouth. "Pod systems are online," he managed to say. Launching now. The tiny craft shot away from the dying station just as another section collapsed. Jake strapped himself into the pilot's seat and tried to focus on the controls, but his vision was blurring and his hands were shaking. "Jake, respond," came Zarath's voice through the pod's communicator. "Are you all right?" "I'm alive," Jake said, though he wasn't sure for how much longer. "But I'm in bad shape. The radiation exposure—" "We see your pod," Zarath said. "Docking. Bay is open and ready. Medical team is standing by." Jake lost consciousness somewhere between the pod and the Void Dancer's docking bay. When he woke up, he was lying in the ship's medical bay with various alien medical devices attached to his body. Zarath was sitting beside his bed, her crystalline features tight with worry. "The data?" Jake asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Safe," Zarath replied. "The Korath government is very grateful. You saved years of research." Jake tried to sit up, but Zarath gently pushed him back down. "How long was I out?" 18 hours. The medical computer says you'll recover completely. But you need rest." She paused, studying his face. "Why did you do it?" "You could have died in there." Jake thought about the question for a moment. "Because it was the right thing to do. And because I wanted to prove myself to you." Zarath was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was very soft. "You have nothing to prove, Jake. Not to me." "After what happened at the station?" "What happened at the station was my fault, not yours," Zarath interrupted. "I was embarrassed by my crew's reaction, and I took that embarrassment out on you. It was wrong." She stood up and walked to the small viewport that looked out into space. "My people believe in rigid hierarchies. Captains command, crew members obey, and everyone knows their place. But humans are different, aren't they?" Jake was back on his feet within a week, though the medical computer insisted he take things easy for another few days. The successful recovery of the Korath research data had earned the Void Dancer enough credits to operate comfortably for months, and the crew's attitude toward Jake had shifted noticeably. They no longer saw him as just a useful pet, but as someone who had risked his life for their benefit. Captain Zarath had also made changes. Jake's quarters had been moved from the storage level to the crew deck, and his daily assignments now came directly from her instead of being filtered through Korth. It was a small promotion, but significant in the rigid hierarchy of a Veltar ship. They were cruising through the outer rim, looking for their next salvage opportunity, when Thys detected something unusual on the long-range scanners. "Captain," she called from the navigation station, "I'm reading a massive energy signature about 2 light-years ahead of us. The computer can't identify the source." Zarath studied the display, her 4 arms moving gracefully over the controls as she analyzed the data. "Size and configuration?" "Unknown," Thys replied. "The energy output is off the scale, but it's not moving. Whatever it is, it's just sitting there in empty space." Jake joined them at the navigation console, looking over the strange readings. The energy signature was unlike anything in the ship's database, which contained information on technology from dozens of different species. "It could be a weapon," Korth suggested, "or some kind of research station. Or it could be the find of a lifetime," Zarath said quietly. "Set course for the energy source, maximum speed." The journey took them 6 hours, and as they dropped, out of faster-than-light travel, Jake felt his breath catch in his throat. Floating in the void ahead of them was a ship unlike anything he had ever seen. It was enormous, easily the size of a small moon, and its hull was covered in geometric patterns that seemed to shift and change as he watched. "By the crystals," Thys whispered. What is that thing? It's old, Zarath said, studying the sensor readings. Very old. The energy signature suggests it's been here for thousands of years. Any signs of life? Jake asked. None, Korth replied. But the power systems are still active. Whatever built this thing, they designed it to last. They approached the massive vessel carefully, scanning for weapons or defensive systems. But the ancient ship seemed completely passive, floating in space like a sleeping giant. There were several possible docking ports, but they were all designed for ships much larger than the Void Dancer. There, Jake said, pointing to a section of the hull where the geometric patterns formed what looked like an access hatch. That looks like it might be an airlock. It's too small for our ship to dock, Zarath observed. But not too small for a shuttle, Jake replied. I could take one of the work pods over there and see if I can get inside. Absolutely not, Zarath said immediately. After what happened at the research station, you're not going on any more dangerous missions alone. Captain, with respect, I'm the only one small enough to fit through that airlock, and if there are any narrow passages inside, you'll need someone who can navigate them. Zarath considered this for a moment, then nodded reluctantly. Very well, but you take a full sensor package and maintain constant communication. At the first sign of danger, you return to the ship immediately. Jake took one of the small work pods and carefully approached the ancient vessel. The airlock responded to his presence, opening with a soft hiss that suggested the atmosphere inside was still breathable. He docked the pod and stepped through, into a corridor that stretched away into darkness. The interior of the ship was even more impressive than the outside. The walls were covered in the same shifting geometric patterns, and they glowed with a soft blue light that seemed to respond to Jake's movements. The corridors were wide enough for multiple beings to walk side by side, but the proportions felt somehow wrong for any species Jake knew about. I'm inside, he reported. The corridors are huge, but the control panels and interfaces are all sized for beings about my height. Whoever built this ship, they were roughly human-sized. Impossible, came Thiss's voice through the communicator. No species that small could have built something this advanced. Jake continued deeper into the ship, following the energy readings toward what appeared to be the central control room. The technology around him was beyond anything he had ever seen, not just more advanced than current galactic civilization, but fundamentally different in its approach. The control room was a circular chamber with a raised platform in the center. As Jake stepped onto the platform, the geometric patterns on the walls suddenly brightened, and holographic displays materialized around him. The ship is activating, he reported, trying to keep the wonder out of his voice. The controls are responding to my presence. He reached toward one of the holographic interfaces, and the moment his finger touched it, information flooded into his mind. Not through his communicator or his suit's display, but directly into his consciousness. For a moment, Jake was overwhelmed by the sheer amount of data, but then his brain began to process and organize it. Jake, report! Zarath's voice seemed to come from very far away. I'm interfacing with the ship's computer, Jake said, his voice sounding strange even to himself. It's some kind of direct neural connection. The ship is trying to communicate with me. The information continued to flow, and Jake began to understand what he was seeing. This was not just a ship. It was an ark, built by an ancient human civilization that had existed millions of years ago. They had been the first species to achieve faster-than-light travel, the first to explore the galaxy, and they had built this vessel as a repository of their knowledge before their civilization fell. The ship is human, Jake said, his voice filled with awe. built by an ancient human civilization that predates all current galactic species. They were the first ones out here. That's impossible, came Korth's voice. Humans are a primitive species that only achieved space travel a few centuries ago. Not these humans, Jake replied, his understanding deepening as more information flowed into his mind. They were advanced beyond anything we can imagine today. But something happened to them. A war or a plague, or maybe just the natural cycle of civilizations. They built this ship to preserve their knowledge for whoever came after. The neural interface was showing Jake how to operate the ship's systems, and he realized that the technology was designed specifically to respond to human brain patterns. Other species could study it, but they could never truly understand it or operate it effectively. "Captain," Jake said, his voice growing more urgent. "I'm detecting approaching ships. Multiple contacts, moving fast." "We see them," Zarath replied. "Galactic Authority vessels. They must have detected the energy signature." Jake understood the implications immediately. The Galactic Authority was controlled by the major spacefaring species, the Veltar, the Kron, the Therians. If they claimed this ship, humans would never be allowed near it. All of this advanced human technology would be locked away in some government facility, studied by species who could never fully understand it. "Jake," Zarath's voice was tight with urgency. "You need to get out of there now. The Authority ships are demanding we surrender salvage rights and prepare to be boarded." Jake looked around the control room, at the holographic displays showing systems beyond his wildest dreams. Faster-than-light drives that could cross the galaxy in days, energy sources that could power entire civilizations, medical technology that could extend life indefinitely. All of it was human technology, built by his own species' ancestors. "Negative, Captain," Jake said, his hands moving across the neural interfaces. "I'm not leaving this ship." "Jake, that's an order. I'm not your crew member anymore, Zarath," Jake said gently. "I'm the captain of this vessel now. The ship has chosen me as its commander." As if responding to his words, the ancient ship's engines came online for the first time in millennia. The massive vessel began to move, its advanced propulsion system making the Galactic Authority ships look like children's toys in comparison. "This changes everything," Jake continued, his consciousness now fully integrated with the ship's computer systems. "This ship proves that humans were the first spacefaring species in the galaxy. We have older claim to the stars than any other race." "The Authority ships are charging weapons," Zarath reported. "Tell them to stand down," Jake replied, and his new ship's defensive systems activated automatically. Energy shields flared to life around the massive vessel, and weapon ports opened along its hull. "This ship is under the protection of Earth and the human government. Jake." Zarath's voice was soft now, almost sad. "What happens now?" Jake considered the question, as he felt the ancient ship's knowledge settling into his mind. He had the power to change the balance of galactic civilization, to elevate humanity from a backwater species to one of the major powers. But he also had something more personal to consider. "Now I go home," Jake said finally. "I take this ship back to Earth space and share its knowledge with my people. Humanity deserves to know what we once were and what we can become again." "And us?" Zarath asked. "What happens to the Void Dancer?" The journey back to Earth space took 3 weeks, but for Jake, it felt like 3 years. Every day brought new discoveries about the ancient ship and its incredible technology. The Legacy was not just a vessel, it was a complete library of human knowledge from a civilization that had ruled the galaxy millions of years ago. Jake spent most of his time in the ship's central computer core, learning how to access the vast stores of information. The neural interface allowed him to download knowledge directly into his mind, but he had to be careful not to absorb too much at once. The first time he tried to learn about the ship's faster-than-light drive, the information overload left him, unconscious for 6 hours. Captain Zarath visited him regularly, bringing food and checking on his progress. The Void Dancer flew alongside the Legacy like a small escort ship, its crew helping Jake learn to operate systems that were beyond their understanding. "You look tired," Zarath said during one of her visits. She found Jake sitting in the pilot's chair, staring at holographic displays that showed star charts from before her species had even evolved. "The ship is teaching me about our history," Jake replied, rubbing his eyes. "Did you know that ancient humans had an empire that stretched across half the galaxy? They had colonies on thousands of worlds, trade routes that connected every major star system." "What happened to them?" Zarath asked, settling into the co-pilot's seat beside him. "The same thing that happens to all civilizations eventually," Jake said sadly. "They grew too large, too comfortable. Wars broke out between different human factions. Plagues spread across the trade routes. Climate disasters destroyed entire worlds. It took about 500 years for everything to collapse." Zarath studied the star charts, noting the locations of ancient human colonies. Many of them were in systems now controlled by her own people or other galactic species. "Your ancestors built all of this, and now humans are treated as primitives." "Not for much longer," Jake said, his voice carrying new determination. "This ship changes everything. When we reach Earth, humanity will finally have proof of what we once were and what we can become again." 2 days later, they entered the Sol system, and Jake felt his heart race as he saw the familiar blue-green world of his birth. But Earth was not their first destination. Jake piloted the Legacy toward Luna, Earth's moon, where the human government maintained its primary space facilities. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Every sensor on the moon and in Earth orbit focused on the massive ship as it approached. Military vessels scrambled to intercept, but they stopped short when Jake transmitted his identification codes and requested permission to dock at Luna. "Central, this is Admiral Chen of Earth Defense Command," came a voice over the communication system. "Identify yourself and state your intentions." "This is Captain Jake Morrison aboard the Legacy," Jake replied, still amazed to hear himself use that title. "I have information of vital importance to Earth and all of humanity. Request immediate meeting with the Colonial Council." There was a long pause before Admiral Chen responded. "Captain Morrison, our records show you as missing, presumed dead, after a salvage operation in the Outer Rim 6 months ago." "I was captured by aliens," Jake said simply. "But that's not important right now. What's important is this ship and what it represents for humanity's future." The docking process at Luna Central took several hours, with teams of engineers and security personnel swarming over the Legacy's hull. Jake met them at the main airlock, accompanied by Zarath and her senior crew members. The sight of a human walking off an obviously alien supership, followed by a group of towering Veltar warriors, created quite a stir. Admiral Chen was waiting for them in the main conference room, along with several members of the Colonial Council and a team of scientists. Jake had met Chen once before, during his military service, and the older man's expression showed both recognition and complete bewilderment. "Jake Morrison," Chen said, standing to shake hands. "When we lost contact with your salvage ship, we assumed the worst. How did you end up commanding that thing? It's a long story, Admiral, Jake replied, then gestured to his companions. But first, let me introduce Captain Zarath of the Veltar vessel Void Dancer and her crew. They saved my life and helped me get this ship home. The formal introductions took several minutes, with both sides being carefully polite. Jake could see the curiosity and suspicion in the human officials' eyes as they studied the tall, crystalline aliens. "Now then," said Counselor Williams, a stern woman who chaired the Colonial Council, "perhaps you can explain how a human salvager came to command what our sensors tell us is the most advanced ship ever detected." Jake took a deep breath and began his story. He told them about his capture, his time aboard the Void Dancer, and the discovery of the ancient vessel. He explained about the neural interface and the vast stores of knowledge contained within the ship's computer systems. "You're saying this ship was built by humans?" Admiral Chen asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "Millions of years ago?" "Not millions," Jake corrected. "The computer dates the ship's construction to approximately 50,000 years ago, long before any current galactic civilization, but not as ancient as I first thought." He activated a small holographic projector he had brought from the ship, showing star charts and historical records. The display showed the rise and fall of the ancient human empire, with colonies spreading across the galaxy before eventually collapsing back to isolated worlds. "Earth was not the only human world to survive," Jake continued, "but it was one of the few that managed to rebuild from scratch. Most of the other colonies died out or regressed to primitive levels. We are the inheritors of a great civilization." The room was silent as everyone absorbed this information. Finally, Counselor Williams spoke. "Assuming all of this is true," she said carefully, "what does it mean for humanity now?" "It means we have a legitimate claim to equal status in the galactic community," Jake replied. "We were here first. We built the foundation that all other civilizations are based on. The other species have been treating us as primitives because they didn't know our true history. And this ship proves." "Our claims?" Admiral Chen asked. "This ship is just the beginning," Jake said, his excitement growing. "The legacy contains the locations of other human ruins throughout the galaxy. Ancient libraries, abandoned colonies, technology caches. We can rebuild our understanding of what we once were and use that knowledge to reclaim our rightful place among the stars." Captain Zarath, who had been silent throughout the presentation, finally spoke up. "If I may," she said in her accented English, "I have seen Captain Morrison's abilities firsthand. Humans possess qualities that other species underestimate. Creativity, adaptability, determination. With this ship and the knowledge it contains, humanity could become a major power in the galaxy again." "You support our claims?" Counselor Williams asked, surprised. "I support the truth," Zarath replied. "And the truth is that humans deserve respect. Captain Morrison earned mine through his actions, not his species. But this ship proves that human capabilities go far beyond what any of us realized." Jake felt a warm surge of gratitude toward Zarath. Her endorsement carried weight. The Veltar were respected throughout the galaxy for their honesty and technological expertise. "There's something else," Jake continued. "The ship's computer contains detailed information about dozens of other species, including complete genetic and cultural profiles. Some of the so-called ancient races in the galaxy are actually descendants of species that humans first contacted and uplifted 50,000 years ago. This revelation caused an even bigger stir in the room. If Jake was right, it would reshape the entire understanding of galactic history and politics. "We need time to verify all of this," Admiral Chen said finally. But if even half of what you're saying is true, it changes everything. I know, Jake replied. That's why I brought the ship here first, before anyone else could claim it. This knowledge belongs to humanity, and we're going to use it to build a better future for all of us. As the meeting broke up and plans were made for detailed analysis of the legacy and its contents, Jake found himself standing on an observation deck looking out at Earth. Zarath joined him, her crystalline skin reflecting the blue light from his home world. "No going back now?" she said quietly. "No," Jake agreed. "Everything changes from here. For humans, for your people, for everyone. Are you ready for that kind of responsibility?" Jake thought about the question for a moment, then smiled. 6 months ago, I was just a salvager trying to make enough money to survive. Now I'm the captain of the most advanced ship in the galaxy, and possibly the key to humanity's future. Ready or not? This is what we're doing? Zarath was quiet for a moment, then asked the question that had been hanging between them for weeks. What happens to us now? To the Void Dancer and my crew? Jake turned to look at her, seeing not the alien captain who had once called him her pet, but a partner and friend who had risked everything to help him. That's up to you. I could use experienced officers for the legacy, and humanity is going to need allies in what's coming next. Zarath considered this, then nodded slowly. I think my crew would be interested in that arrangement. After all, we've already followed one human captain this far. Why stop now? The news of humanity's true heritage spread across the galaxy faster than Jake had expected. Within days of his presentation to the Colonial Council, every major species had intercepted the transmissions from Earth. The reaction was swift and not entirely friendly. Jake was in the Legacy's command center, reviewing ancient star charts with a team of human scientists, when Admiral Chen contacted him with urgent news. "Jake, we've got a problem," the Admiral said, his face grim on the holographic display. "The Galactic Council has called an emergency session. They're demanding that Earth surrender the legacy for proper scientific study by neutral parties." Neutral. Parties meaning them, Jake said, not surprised by this development. What's our official response? The Colonial Council is still debating that, Chen replied. But there's more. 3 different species have sent fleets toward our system. They claim they're just observing, but our intelligence suggests they're preparing for something more aggressive. Jake felt his stomach tighten. He had expected political pressure, but the possibility of military action was something else entirely. How long do we have? The fastest fleet will arrive in 4 days. The Therian hegemony with about 50 warships. The Kron Confederacy and Veltar Empire are a few days behind them. The Veltar Empire? Jake looked around the command center, until he spotted Zarath, who was working with one of the human technicians on a translation program. Zarath, did you know your people were sending a fleet here? Zarath's crystalline features darkened as she approached. I did not. But I am not surprised. The revelation that humans were the first galactic civilization has implications for Veltar territorial claims. What kind of implications? 17 Veltar colony worlds are in systems that your ancient star charts show as former human territory, she explained. If humanity chooses to press historical claims, it could destabilize our entire empire. Jake sank into the pilot's chair, suddenly feeling the full weight of what he had unleashed. In his excitement about humanity's heritage, he had not fully considered how this knowledge would threaten the established order of galactic politics. I never intended to start a war, he said quietly. I know, Zarath replied, placing one of her 4 hands on his shoulder. But sometimes change requires conflict. The question is whether we can find a way to minimize the bloodshed. Over the next 2 days, Jake threw himself into studying the Legacy's vast databases, looking for solutions that might prevent a galactic war. The ancient human empire had faced similar challenges when dealing with younger species, and their records contained detailed accounts of diplomacy, trade agreements, and territorial negotiations. Dr. Sarah Martinez, one of the human scientists, studying the ship, made a breakthrough on the 2nd day. Jake, you need to see this, she called from the ship's historical archives section. Jake found her standing before a massive holographic display showing what looked like a 3-dimensional map of the entire galaxy. But instead of current political boundaries, it showed something much older and more complex. This is a complete record of the ancient human empire's territorial agreements, Dr. Martinez explained. Not just what they claimed, but what they formally granted to other species. Look at this! She manipulated the display, highlighting different regions in various colors. The humans didn't just abandon their territory when their empire fell. They formally granted independence to dozens of younger species, along with permanent territorial rights. It's all documented here, with what appear to be legally binding agreements. Jake studied the display, his excitement growing. Are you saying that most of the current galactic territories were actually granted by ancient humans? Not granted, properly transferred through legal treaty, Dr. Martinez corrected, which means humanity doesn't have competing claims to those worlds. We gave them up voluntarily as part of a planned transition of power. This was exactly what Jake needed. He immediately called Admiral Chen and requested an emergency meeting with the Colonial Council. Within hours, he was presenting his findings to the assembled human leadership. Ladies and gentlemen, Jake said, standing before the holographic display. We're not here to reclaim lost territory or challenge existing governments. We're here to take our rightful place as the elder species of the galaxy. Not as conquerors, but as mentors and guides. Counselor Williams leaned forward in her chair. Explain. The ancient human empire didn't collapse through war or disaster. Alone, Jake continued. The final records show a deliberate transition process. Humanity recognized that their time as the dominant galactic power was ending, so they chose to pass on their knowledge and authority to the younger species they had helped develop. He manipulated the display to show treaty documents and transfer agreements. Every major species in the galaxy today received formal recognition and territorial grants from ancient humanity. The Veltar, the Kron, the Therians, they all have legitimate claims to their current territories because our ancestors gave those territories to them. So we're not threatening anyone's territorial claims, Admiral Chen said, understanding dawning in his voice. Exactly. But we are establishing humanity's right to be treated as equals, not primitives. We're the elder species returning to take our place in galactic society, but we're not here to upset the established order. The Colonial Council voted unanimously to adopt this approach. And within hours, Jake found himself preparing for the most important diplomatic mission in human history. The Galactic Council meeting was held on Nexus Prime, the neutral station, where representatives from all major species gathered to discuss matters of galactic importance. Jake had never seen anything like it. A massive structure housing thousands of diplomats, advisors, and support staff from dozens of different worlds. The Legacy docked at the station's largest bay, drawing crowds of curious onlookers who had never seen such an advanced vessel. Jake walked through the corridors accompanied by Admiral Chen, Counselor Williams, and Captain Zarath, who had volunteered to serve as an independent witness to humanity's claims. The main council chamber was enormous, with seating arranged in concentric circles around a central speaking platform. Representatives from every major species were present, along with hundreds of minor species who rarely participated in galactic politics. Jake could feel the tension in the air as he took his place at the podium. "Honored delegates," Jake began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. "I come before you not as a conqueror or a threat, but as the representative of humanity's rightful place in galactic society." A murmur ran through the assembled delegates. The Therian representative, a tall being with iridescent scales, spoke first. "You claim ancient heritage, human, but you offer no proof beyond a single ship of unknown origin." Jake smiled and activated the holographic display he had brought from the Legacy. The ancient star charts appeared in the center of the chamber, showing the galaxy as it existed 50,000 years ago. "I offer more than proof," Jake said. "I offer the complete historical record of the ancient human empire, including all territorial agreements, technology transfers, and diplomatic treaties." The display shifted to show the treaty documents, each one bearing the seals and signatures of both human officials and representatives of the species they were negotiating with. Jake watched as delegates throughout the chamber recognized the symbols of their own ancient governments. "These are the original agreements that established your current territorial boundaries," Jake continued. "Legally binding documents that granted you independence and sovereignty over your homeworlds and colonies. Humanity is not here to challenge these agreements. We are here to confirm them." The chamber erupted in surprised discussion as delegates examined the ancient documents. Jake could see recognition dawning on faces throughout the room as species after species found proof of their legitimate claims to territory they had held for millennia. "What do you want from us?" asked the Kron delegate, a massive being with rocky skin and glowing eyes. "Recognition," Jake said simply. "Humanity asks only to be acknowledged as the elder species we have always been, and to be treated as equals in galactic society. We offer our knowledge, our technology, and our friendship to all species, just as our ancestors did 50,000 years ago." The Veltar delegate, not Zarath, but an older male from the homeworld, stood to speak. "And what of territorial disputes? What of competing claims to resources and trade routes?" "There are no competing claims," Jake replied, highlighting specific sections of the ancient treaties. "Every current boundary dispute in the galaxy can be resolved by referring to these original agreements. Humanity offers to serve as neutral arbitrators in any territorial questions, using the complete historical record to determine rightful ownership." The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. For the first time in galactic history, there was a way to resolve the countless border disputes and territorial conflicts that had plagued interstellar politics for centuries. "We need time to study these documents," the Therian delegate said, finally. "Of course," Jake agreed. "The complete database is available for examination by any accredited diplomatic mission. But I hope you will also consider humanity's request for equal representation in this council." The 3 days following Jake's presentation to the Galactic Council were the longest of his life. Back aboard the Legacy, which remained docked at Nexus Prime, he monitored communications from across the galaxy as species after species examined the ancient human records. The reactions were mixed. Some delegates, particularly from smaller species, were excited by the possibility of finally resolving old territorial disputes. Others, especially those from the major powers, were more cautious. The idea of accepting humanity as an elder species required them to completely rethink their understanding of galactic history. The Therian hegemony has recalled its fleet, Admiral Chen reported during one of their daily calls. Apparently, their historians confirmed that 3 of their disputed border worlds were officially granted to them by ancient human treaties. That's good news, Jake said, though he could tell from Chen's expression that there was more. What about the others? The Kron are still debating. Their fleet is holding position at the edge of our system. And the Veltar. Chen paused, glancing at something off-screen. Their response has been complicated. Jake looked across the command center to where Zarath was working with Dr. Martinez on translating more ancient documents. Complicated. How? There's been some kind of internal conflict in their government. We're getting mixed signals. Some factions want to recognize humanity's claims, others are calling for military action. The fleet they sent is still en route, but we don't know what their orders are when they arrive. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. If the Veltar Empire decided to fight, it would mean conflict with Zarath's own people. He wondered what that would do to her, caught between loyalty to her species and the partnership they had built. As if sensing his thoughts, Zarath approached his station. "Jake, we need to talk privately." They made their way to one of the Legacy's smaller conference rooms, away from the human scientists and technicians who were still studying the ship's systems. Zarath's crystalline features were darker than usual, a sign Jake had learned meant she was troubled. "I received a message from the Veltar fleet commander," she said without preamble. "Admiral Korvac, my former commanding officer. He wants to meet with me before the fleet makes any decisions about Earth." "That sounds reasonable," Jake said carefully. "What's the problem?" "The problem is that Admiral Korvac believes I have been compromised by my association with humans," Zarath replied, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "He thinks you have somehow influenced me to betray my own species." Jake felt anger flare in his chest. "That's ridiculous. You've been nothing but honest about everything. I know that, and you know that. But from Admiral Korvac's perspective, I abandoned my original mission to capture you. I helped you acquire an ancient human warship, and now I'm publicly supporting humanity's claims to elder species status." Zarath sat heavily in one of the chairs, which adjusted automatically to her alien proportions. "From his point of view, my behavior does look suspicious." "So what does he want?" "He wants me to return to the Veltar fleet to explain my actions, alone." Zarath met Jake's eyes. "He's made it clear that if I refuse, I'll be branded a traitor to the Empire." Jake stared at her, understanding the implications. "He's trying to separate us. If you go back to the fleet, they might not let you return. And without you as a witness to support our claims, the other species might question whether a human really did save an ancient ship, or whether this is all an elaborate deception." Zarath finished. "Yes, I understand the political calculation." They sat in silence for a moment, both understanding the impossible position they found themselves in. If Zarath stayed with Jake, she would be branded a traitor by her own people. If she left, humanity's credibility in the galactic community would be severely damaged. "There's another possibility," Jake said slowly. "What if we both go?" "Jake, no. The risk is too great. If Admiral Korvac decides you're a threat, you could be imprisoned or worse. The Legacy would be left without its captain." The legacy can function without me for a few days, Jake replied. The ship's computer systems are advanced enough to handle basic operations. But our partnership, our friendship, that's what's really threatening to the old order. Maybe it's time to show them that it doesn't have to be. Zareth studied his face. You would risk your life to help me explain my actions to my own people? You risked your career and your standing with your crew to help me, Jake said simply. This is what partners do. 2 days later, Jake found himself aboard a small diplomatic shuttle, approaching the Veltar fleet that hung in space just outside Earth's solar system. The fleet was impressive, 30 warships arranged in perfect formation, their crystalline, hulls reflecting the light of distant stars. The flagship, a massive vessel called the Crystal Sword, dwarfed even the Legacy. Jake felt very small as their shuttle was brought aboard, and he stepped out into a docking bay filled with Veltar warriors. Admiral Korvac was waiting for them, flanked by his senior officers. He was older than Zareth, with elaborate crystal, growths that marked him as a member of the Veltar nobility, his 4 eyes fixed on Jake with undisguised hostility. Captain Zareth, he said formally, ignoring Jake completely. You will explain your actions over the past several months. Admiral Korvac, Zareth replied, matching his formal tone. I present Captain Jake Morrison of the human vessel Legacy and request that he be granted guest status during these proceedings. A human has no status aboard a Veltar warship, Admiral Korvac replied coldly. It will remain silent while you account for your betrayal of the Empire. Jake felt his temper flare, but Zareth caught his eye and gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head. This was her show, and he needed to trust her to handle it. Admiral, Zareth began, I have committed no betrayal. I have uncovered evidence of humanity's true place in galactic history, and I have acted in the best interests of the Veltar Empire by supporting the peaceful resolution of territorial disputes. You abandoned your mission, Admiral Korvac accused. You were ordered to investigate human salvage activities, not to form personal attachments with primitive aliens. My mission was to investigate human capabilities, Zareth corrected. And I discovered that those capabilities far exceed what we previously believed. Captain Morrison demonstrated skills and knowledge that helped my crew survive multiple dangerous situations. He risked his life to save Veltar personnel, including myself. Admiral Korvac turned his hostile gaze on Jake. Is this true, human? Did you risk your life for Veltar crew members? Jake straightened his shoulders and met the Admiral's eyes. Yes, sir. Multiple times. Captain Zareth and her crew became my friends and colleagues. I would do anything to protect them. Friends, Admiral Korvac repeated, his voice dripping with disdain. Veltar do not make friends with inferior species. With respect, Admiral, Jake said carefully, I don't think any species is inferior to another. We all have different strengths and weaknesses. Humans are good at some things, Veltar are good at others. Together, we're stronger than we are apart. Philosophy from a primitive, Admiral Korvac sneered. How enlightening. But Jake noticed that some of the other officers in the room were listening with interest rather than hostility. His words were reaching at least some of them. Admiral, Zareth said, her voice carrying new strength, I request permission to demonstrate the practical benefits of human-Veltar cooperation. Demonstrate how? Your ship's sensors have detected the ancient human technology aboard the Legacy. Our scientists have been unable to fully understand how it works. But Captain Morrison, through his neural interface with the ship's computer, has complete access to the technological specifications. He could share that knowledge with your engineering teams. Admiral Korvac's expression changed slightly. Calculation. Replacing contempt. Advanced technology was something every military commander understood the value of. "You would share your people's ancient secrets with us?" he asked Jake directly. "If it helps build trust between our species," Jake replied. "Knowledge should be shared, not hoarded. That's what the ancient humans believed, and it's what I believe." 2. For the first time since they had arrived, Admiral Korvac looked uncertain. The offer of advanced technology was too valuable to dismiss out of hand, but accepting it would mean acknowledging that humans had something worthwhile to offer. "I will consider your proposal," he said finally. "Captain Zarath, you will remain aboard this ship while we evaluate the situation. The human will be returned to its vessel." "Actually," Jake said, "I'd like to stay too. If you're going to evaluate human-Veltar cooperation, it would help to have a human present for the discussion." Admiral Korvac stared at him for a long moment. "You would remain voluntarily aboard a ship where you have no friends and no protection?" Jake glanced at Zarath, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. "I have at least one friend here, Admiral. And sometimes trust has to start with someone taking the first risk." The Admiral's crystalline features were unreadable as he considered this. Finally, he made his decision. "Very well, Captain Morrison. You will be our guest for the next 3 days while we study your proposals. But understand, if this is some kind of human deception, you will not leave this ship alive." "I understand," Jake replied calmly, "and I accept those terms." As he was escorted to guest quarters,